Welcome. Today we are going to talk about the nature of an argument. What actually is, philosophically speaking, an argument? How do they work? What are their parts? What's a good one? What's a bad one? What's the difference between an argument and a claim? This is just a basic understanding for this course, trying to identify, reconstruct, evaluate, and give arguments with attention to their internal structure. What is the premise? What is the claim? What are the conclusions that the premises are trying to support, and what distinguishes them from just somebody saying something, right? What's an actual argument? And so that is what we're going to address today. So to start with, what do you think an argument is? Stop and actually reflect for a second on what's the difference between a fight that you have with a friend, a coworker, somebody you meet on the street, and what is an actual argument? What parts are required of an argument? What's the point of an argument? It's not just to yell at somebody and say you're an idiot and I'm right, but there's something else to it. There's an extra layer, especially when we're talking about what is a philosophical argument as opposed to just a common confrontation that you might have with a stranger or a friend or anybody else. So I won't make you wait too long. I'll let you know what an argument is, right? Used in logic or in philosophy generally, an argument is a set of statements, all but one of which is intended to provide support or evidence for the remaining statements. So all of them are supporting or building on this. The statement in an argument for which the others are intended to provide support for is called a conclusion. Conclusions of an argument are often introduced with some sort of indicator, a word that lets you know this is different. This is the point of this whole chain of discussion, be it one or two or seven different things or even longer, right? Usually this indicator is something along the lines of therefore or thus or hence or so, right? These like, all right, we've been building to it, here we go. Now is the what we're looking for. Now is the payoff. This is what should be proved by what we've done. The statements in an argument that are supposed to provide the support for this conclusion are called premises. Right? The premise of the argument helps to build support for the conclusion. The premises are sometimes introduced with other words, indicators, since, for, because, right? So there's this like, since this is the case, therefore that is a very basic frame of an argument. Now, there is a difference between a premise and an argument as well. Your argument, broadly speaking, is the single idea that you're trying to advocate for. What is the actual thing you're trying to say the therefore, right? This is the argument. This is what you're trying to do. The premises are the part of the argument, which, if true, will naturally build and support to this conclusion. So it might be something, if you're writing an argument where you've got, premise 1, A. Premise 2, if A, therefore B. Premise 3, A is true. Maybe you've got some other claims involved in here saying, A is obviously true because I've seen it, you've seen it, it's common knowledge, whatever, right? Here's a noteworthy article, or here's some other philosopher who's claimed it, or something along those lines. Conclusion, therefore, is that B is true. So, right, we've built this logical sort of frame. The conclusion is the very last thing that then everything else is building to. This is the argument. Oftentimes it's a restatement of that initial position, right? We might want to start off by saying B is true. Then premise 1, A. Here's what A is. Here's common ground that we can agree with. Premise 2, if A is true, then we need to understand that B is true also. Premise 3, well, we all know, through, Socrates argued that A is true, therefore we can take A as a valid, assumption, conclusion, B is true. That would kind of work. What, philosophically speaking, makes an argument good? Logically speaking, and philosophically, in general, the methods for determining whether the premises of an argument, if true, provide adequate support for the conclusion. That's the basic idea of what makes a good argument. If the premises are true, does it support the conclusion? Well, Socrates didn't argue that. Well, okay, then I guess then that's not true, right? But the best possible case would be that if the premises are true, that it guarantees the conclusion to also be true. Philosophically speaking, the term that we use for this is valid. Broadly speaking, you can use the term deductively valid, but most people just say valid because it's shorter, it's easier, right? That's the way we work. For instance, an argument might say that all bachelors are unmarried. John is unmarried, therefore John is a bachelor. This is a good argument, right? The whole point of what we're trying to figure out is John indeed a bachelor, right? We have that it's clearly the conclusion. We have that little Q word, right? You all noticed the therefore when we were discussing it. And now we have two very simple, easy premises that are going to guarantee this conclusion, right? All bachelors are unmarried. We all agree on that. You might want to put a pause in there and understand, okay, we'll open up the dictionary. Okay, what's the definition of a bachelor? It's a man who's not unmarried. Okay, all right, then fine, we'll all agree. John, are you married? No, John's unmarried. Therefore, John is a bachelor. And now we've made this argument, and this is the case, and we all agree with it, right? It's all of the premises are true and guarantees that the conclusion is also true. Now, not every argument is constructed in such a way. There might be something that's not true, or at least that it's possible that the conclusion might be false, while at the same time the premises are true. This is known as an invalid argument. And this is a distinction between valid arguments and invalid arguments. Invalid when and only when it's at least possible for its conclusion to be false, while at the same time its premises are true. For instance, lions are dangerous. Detroit is dangerous. Therefore, Detroit is a lion. Okay, that's obviously not true. Well, we have Detroit lions, and we might all agree that lions are dangerous, and we may or may not say parts of Detroit are dangerous or not, or any other argument along those lines. Even if we concede that lions are dangerous and Detroit is dangerous, it doesn't mean that Detroit is a lion. That therefore doesn't follow. So it isn't valid. Even though the premises may indeed be true, that doesn't mean that the conclusion which follows is guaranteed to be true either. So we have this sort of different category also, this in between. In the next best case argument, right, the premises, if true, make it very likely that the conclusion is true. And it doesn't guarantee it like that first possible case, but it's very strong that it's going to be a possibility. The official term for this is that it is inductively strong. Right? It is likely to be true, but there's a chance that it's not. And most arguments are likely going to be kind of fitting into this sort of field, because if we all know everything is clearly the case, then why are we engaged in the argument, right? There's this idea that there's this chance, right? That's oftentimes even admitted that there's this possibility that it's not the case, right? Oh, 98% of this is therefore that, right? So you know that it's most likely true. And again, this is an inductively strong argument of what we're trying to point out, right? So eating healthy foods is good for you. We'll all agree with, this statement, right? Most vegetables are healthy. Eating any vegetable is probably good for you. Or we can even put in the therefore, eating any vegetable is probably good for you. Now, I'm admitting in there, right, that healthy foods are good for you. Most vegetables are healthy. I'm not saying all vegetables are healthy. I'm not saying they're all healthy in every way, or even defining at this point what a vegetable is, because then we can argue about all of that. So most vegetables are healthy. So eating any vegetable is probably good for you. It's a strong argument, but it's not a guarantee. It's a probability. And it's probably one that works for most of us, and kind of that space that just in life most of us are. The best point is to try to get a valid argument. The thing you want to avoid is an invalid argument. And if you can't get a valid argument, right, you're going to try to have an argument that is at least inductively strong, that's going to help provide this sort of basis that it's probably the case. And then we can kind of move that on to, if that, then what should we do? How should we approach something if we all agree that this is probably the case? New evidence might, show something different, etc. Or, but right, that would be a good philosophical standpoint to be on. Well, it's really important that you construct a valid argument. Right? It's valid because all of the premises line up, and the conclusion is a guarantee from all of that, right? The idea, the subject and object in each of the claims lines up and builds this argument, right? What you really want is to have is a sound argument, right? An argument is sound when and only when it is both valid and has all true premises, that everything is true about everything you're saying along those lines. Otherwise, it's said to be unsound. And it's possible to have unsound arguments that are valid. It's possible to have valid arguments that are unsound, right? The arguments to be a really good argument are both sound and valid. An example of a sound argument is that all Republicans live on Earth. First premise. Trump is a Republican. Right? We'll all agree with this. He served as the Republican nominee for president, and therefore Trump lives on Earth. Now notice here what we're trying to make the argument for. It's who lives on Earth. This is the subject to this. Trump is a Republican. Republicans live on Earth. So if we just simply X out the term Republican, and because Trump has been equated to Republican, it is very easy, right? Notice the term here for where we're concluding, right? The indicator word, the therefore. Trump lives on Earth. It's very simple to just move from one to the other to the other. And this is what we're doing. This is a sound argument. Each of the claims are true. Logically, it follows, right? Trump has now taken the place here of the term Republican, and the argument works. It is a sound and valid argument. Examples of some unsound arguments, right? Remember, an argument is unsound because either the structure of which is invalid. We don't have the subject and object of our premises building off of each other like we saw that last one. Or because all the premises aren't true. So let's have an example here of an argument that is unsound. All Republicans live on Earth. Trump lives on Earth. Therefore, Trump is a Republican. Now notice that all of the premises are true. All Republicans live on Earth. Trump lives on Earth. Trump is a Republican. But the therefore doesn't follow from this argument. We know that it's unsound because our subject and object within each of these claims don't line up. We can easily swap out Trump with Biden, who was nominated and served as the Democrat nominee for president, right? All Republicans live on Earth. Biden lives on Earth. Both of those are now true. Therefore, Biden is a Republican. Wait, that clearly doesn't follow. Therefore, it shows us that the argument was invalid to begin with. Because, again, as we saw last time, we're talking about who lives on Earth. We can't say everyone lives on Earth, therefore this other group, right? That doesn't follow. It is an invalid argument. We can also have arguments that are unsound because the premises aren't true, even though it's might be a valid argument, right? All Republicans live on Mars. Trump is a Republican. Therefore, Trump lives on Mars. Now, that is a valid argument. The frame of it works just as it should. But the premises aren't all true. Not all Republicans live on Mars. Even though, right, Trump is a Republican, that doesn't, it's a valid argument, but it's not sound because that first premise is not true. Therefore, it is an unsound but valid argument. So again, we see here that we can have arguments that are unsound because they're invalid or because their premises are not all true. And that this would, give us our idea of what an unsound argument is. Now, it's really important to understand that there's a difference between a claim and an argument. A claim is a statement that we intend to describe some aspect of reality. Arguments have parts that build off of each other. The idea of a claim is that it's just some sort of relation of one idea to something else. It may or may not be true. You have to evaluate that. But a claim is just this idea of, hey, this is true, or at least I'm trying to advance it as being the case. It's not filled with a lot of parts. In fact, you can even make arguments out of a claim and say, well, let me show you that this claim is true. That's maybe the whole point of what you're trying to do, if it's indeed the conclusion. But a claim doesn't have parts, essentially. Right? It's just relating one idea to another. For instance, a claim would be something like trees are real. You'll accept that or not. You can agree with this idea or not. You can accept that there's some sort of foundational idea of what treeness is when I'm saying real, or you can question whether or not real makes sense. But generally speaking, you'd probably say that it's true, that you accept this as an idea. And if I was building an argument out of this as a claim, you would know where to go with it. You'd accept some of it. Some claims might not be true, like I'm an alien from another planet. You might evaluate that and disagree. Say, you know what, I don't think so. Or, others that were in a classroom where all desks are made out of bees. These are just ideas that are relating from one piece to another that may or may not be true. They're not an argument. They're relating ideas, parts of an argument. Maybe they're the premise of an argument. Maybe they're even the conclusion of an argument. But by itself, it's just a claim. An argument needs parts that build on one another, that shows a logical structure, that we have at least to accept that it's a valid form. And hopefully then we'll agree that all of these claims, all of these premises are sound, are true, and we'll have a sound argument. But these statements on their own are just relating one idea or another. These are just claims. They may be true, they may not be true. They may be something that you need to further examine or not, right? So again, by itself, this is just a claim. This is not an argument. Now, there are many different types of forms or of arguments. Remember, arguments have got parts to them. It builds on itself, and it can be very small or it can be very large. The claims are individual things. Arguments have claims or premises as a part of them. You've probably encountered two types of philosophical arguments in your life, maybe without even knowing it. The official names for these are modus ponens and modus tollens. Modus ponens is if A, then B, A, therefore B. It's a very simple, short, easy sort of argument that, again, you might have multiple claims built into it. What the modus ponens means is that you're affirming the antecedent. Now, earlier I used terms like subject and object because it's familiar with you. It's not; those are not the proper terms on how we should be addressing things philosophically. What we have are things known as the antecedent, the ifs, and the consequent, the therefore. And so modus ponens literally means that we're affirming the antecedent. We're saying that yes, indeed, A is the case. We're affirming that part, A then B, right? A, therefore B. It's very simple. You've probably used it in your life. Now, again, this is a valid form. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's sound. An example, right? If it barks, then it's a dog. It barks, therefore it's a dog. A, then B. A is true, therefore B. Now, again, this is valid. It might not be sound. You might say, I have an uncle who barks. He's not a dog. Okay, it's not sound. Right? We are not necessarily agreeing that if it barks, then it's a dog. Maybe that part, that claim is wrong, but that doesn't mean that it's not a valid form. Generally speaking, we would say that this is a sound argument as well. But, hey, modus tollens works differently. If A, then B starts off looking the same. Not B, therefore not A. This is what's known as denying the consequent. We're denying the claims built into this, right? An example here, if I had 4 arms, I would be a monster. I do not have 4 arms, therefore I'm not a monster. Now, maybe I am a monster, or maybe I do have 4 arms. We're not addressing the soundness of this argument. We're addressing the validity of this argument. This is another valid argument form. These are good forms. All right, so we can use commonly modus ponens or modus tollens to advance an argument where we have a series of claims that are going to build into an argument. We have the therefore, right? We have the parts of the argument. We have the antecedent and we have the consequent. And that this is going to tell us if something is valid or not. It's important to know the structure of the arguments, right? That we have the consequent and we have the antecedent in the actual form of modus ponens and modus tollens, because if you do it wrong, if you've got it in the wrong form, it's not a valid argument. It's invalid. And you know this is just logically not going to be true when you stop and think about it. Right? You might accidentally affirm the consequent. If A, then B, B, therefore A, and you know that that's not going to be valid. For instance, if it barks, then it's a dog. It's a dog, therefore it barks. Now notice this is almost the same as the argument that we used of a valid form, but instead of affirming the antecedent, we're affirming the consequent. And therefore, it doesn't work, because just because it's a dog doesn't mean that it barks. That might be true, but that's not what you're arguing. That's not valid. It's bad. It's invalid. Same with denying the antecedent. If A, then B, not A, therefore not B. Very similar to modus tollens, but it's not, right? If I had 4 arms, I would be a monster. I'm not a monster, therefore I don't have 4 arms. It doesn't follow. It doesn't logically work. Maybe you are a monster without any arms. Or maybe you have 4 arms and are indeed a monster. It doesn't really follow one way or the other, the way that the denying the antecedent works. If you accidentally affirm the consequent or deny the antecedent, instead of making something that logically follows and logically is true, you've made an invalid argument, because it doesn't necessarily have to follow. It might be still true in just what you're saying is actually true, but it's not because it's logically true. It's not consistently there for the case. And so you need to make sure that if you're using modus ponens or modus tollens, that you're using it correctly and not accidentally doing the opposite of what you want. Here's an argument that is valid. It's very simple and easy to follow. It follows a basic modus ponens framework, and it's got multiple premises that lead us to the conclusion. Now, the conclusion might not be something that you like. For instance, the conclusion we might make is that one ought not to be moral, which is a very odd sort of argument to make in a philosophy class, especially because ethics is a sphere of philosophy, and we've talked about ethical theories, at least in part so far in this course. But we could make the argument that one ought not to be moral. How can I do that? Well, morality is best defined by Kant. And you might disagree with me at this point, but if you're going to agree with this claim, with this premises, then we can kind of move on forward, right? So what we're questioning so far is the soundness of the argument, not its validity. Kant defines morality through the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative makes morality a duty. Duty is an obligation where the participant should not expect any gain, fulfillment, or joy. Life without any gain, fulfillment, or joy is an empty and shallow existence. Therefore, one ought not to be moral. Right? We've put all of these different premises, all of these claims together. They all follow, they all build off of each other, and now we're left with the conclusion that one ought not to be moral. Now, you might point out the soundness of any of these. You might say, I disagree with the idea that morality is best defined by Kant. Maybe really what you're making should be an argument against deontology. Maybe. But maybe we still like Kant and his idea. Or maybe we might disagree with the fifth premise, that life without any gain, fulfillment, or joy is an empty and shallow existence. Maybe we're going to say that's actually going to be the richest life and richest existence. Right? It's a good argument. It's a valid argument. You may even say that it's sound, but the soundness is something that can be debated and argued. What we do know is that it follows logically, and therefore it is a valid argument. There are bad examples as well. It doesn't follow. Sometimes you might have a list of claims or various pieces of evidences that are not really premises, right? They're just examples, things that you're just saying together, but they don't build off of each other. And this is sort of thing that you might do in a bad argument, in a bad formulation, right? For instance, we might have the conclusion that everyone likes speeding tickets, something that we're all going to immediately say, okay, also I disagree with. But right, if the argument is speeding tickets provide needed revenue for police departments or cities, speeding tickets are easy to pay, we like to buy tickets for other events, therefore we should like to buy a speeding ticket and pay for that. Right? These are a bunch of random arguments, random claims that aren't really an argument. They might be individual things that might become an argument, but it's not really the case. And we can also question the soundness of this, but we can see that there's no logical structure. It's just a bunch of random claims that don't lead to any real conclusion. Another bad example kind of carries on this. These ideas aren't even connected. Right? There's no conditional. It's not a single argument. It's just, again, we're throwing the whole kitchen sink at it, sort of idea, right? Every one of these needs to build something to make it a good example, a good argument, but it's not, right? Every lie causes harm to society. Every lie you tell gives others less reasons to trust you. If everyone told a lie whenever it was convenient, it would be that no one would believe anybody. Conclusion, lying is always wrong. Well, these are each good pieces of evidence, and we might even agree that lying is always wrong. But you're just throwing everything at it, and therefore it isn't a good argument. So today we talked about the nature of an argument. We showed some good examples and some bad examples. We showed how things work, what forms are valid, and we showed how if you don't do the forms right, if you have a bad form, that it's not a valid argument. We've talked about the soundness of arguments as well, where the premises are all true and it's a valid form. That's what's going to make it sound. That's really what we want to do. Kind of play around with the idea and the nature of an argument would be a good idea at this point in your discussion group. You can kind of do it if you'd like on the whole question of, is a hot dog a sandwich? You can make and construct a valid argument showing that indeed a hot dog is a sandwich or that it's not. You can lay it out in a good form and show one way or the other and engage on this very vital question. Is a hot dog a sandwich? Or a taco, is that a sandwich? What's the nature of a sandwich? How do you define it? Something that you probably don't think about too much because your thought is, I probably know it when I see it, but why? Does it logically follow? Do you have a good argument or form that's going to let you know that indeed this is the case and other people should agree with me on it? Have fun. If you have any questions about the nature of an argument or claim, what's the difference between modus ponens and tollens, soundness, unsoundness, etc., feel free to reach out.